Hey, what's up, y'all? This is John Grant. I am working on something that I thought might be worth sharing because a lot of people have questions about how to prepare stems if you're trying to collaborate with someone. And so in this case here, I have this track which is already built, everything's ready to go. The question is, should you render out every single element of the collaboration? This is obviously in the context of somebody not having Ableton. If you have Ableton, maybe you're collaborating with somebody who's on Pro Tools or somebody who's on Logic or whatever. And so, how do you prepare stems so that you can send them out and make them easier for a collaboration? And the easiest way to do this is, you can obviously just group the bus stems, which is what I've done here. So inside of each one of these buses, there's multiple different instruments and sounds and categories. In this case, these are all, I've grouped everything together under specific categories. So, like for instance, all of my drums, I just kind of put them in the same thing. But typically in the case of EDM, for instance, what I might do is I might actually separate the drums here. Like I want the kick separated so that that way, my collaborator has access specifically to the drum bus. So everything that has tops, snares, whatever. But sometimes I might even separate the snares and the claps. So I might just do that here. So I'm just going to separate these as well. And then I'll just do a second, bounce of that. Let me just check that there's nothing else. But yeah, generally speaking, I think this stuff should be pretty good to go. I'm actually going to switch my audio engine real quick because I'm on ASIO, which my screen recording app does not like for some reason. Let me see if this works. Yeah, you can hear that. So yeah, I'm just gonna listen to this real quick, audition it. That's perfect. So I got this separated. I got my clap separated. I'm actually going to group both of these, and I'm just going to call these like bus claps. This is my kick, so I'm good to go. Let me just check the bass. That's my main bass. This is my sub. So here's another decision that you can make too. Do you want to separate your sub from your mid-range basses? A lot of times you do, but just ask your collaborating partner if they prefer that. Sometimes they want to try out and test out a different sub if they don't feel that the mix is sounding good. So I am going to leave it as is, and if they ask me to separate the sub, then I will. Next thing is just to check out the melodics. Now I think the part of the track which is probably going to need the most stem separation is probably going to be the melodics, because there's going to be certain elements that maybe your collaborator doesn't want all together. They might want to experiment with different arrangements. They might want to play with the leads and stuff like that. So, obviously you can make that call and that decision. You could obviously always just do this, which is what I'm doing, ungroup all of your melodics and then just stem those out, which is probably what I'm going to do in this case. Vocals, same thing. Check in with your collaborator and see if they feel that they want the vocal separated or not. It's really up to sort of what the ultimate goal is in the collaboration. Since I typically am, when I collaborate, I'm usually the one doing all like the legwork in terms of maintaining the session and stuff like that. I usually have people send me everything and then I just kind of finish it off. But when we're more so in the production phase, there's a lot of back and forth. I recently collaborated with somebody who was working in Logic. And so it was just a lot of, he sends me something, I send him something back. We share MIDIs a lot. And so, yeah, I think this is really like an easy way to just sort of prepare yourself ahead of time. And this is why I think it's so important to label everything as you go, because literally if you're not labeling, you're going to have to do all of this at the end. If you're not grouping things properly. I mean, as you can see here, I am very specific about every single aspect and element of my project. I try to really keep things organized so that it's easier for my collaboration partner to read, and it's also easier for me when I open it just to know exactly where things are at. Like, I know exactly, every time I open a project, they're going to look the same. They're going to have the same colors. They're going to have the same labeling format. And so that's something that you just need to figure out for yourself in terms of how you want to, label your content, or label your stems, your files and all that kind of stuff. And even, when you get down to the granular level, right? Like I might even come back over here and maybe relabel some of these custom one-shots and loops that I've done, just so that it's easier for my collaboration partner to understand. So, And so now the way to separate all these is you would actually select all of the groups that you can do Command or Control A, and then you're going to go and export, and then from rendered track, this section here, you would select selected tracks only. So what does that mean? That means that you're only going to stem out everything that's in your session that's been selected from this arrangement window. So for instance, if I was like, oh, I want to render, everything but the kick, I could do that. Basically, you unhighlight the kick, and now it's only going to render everything but the kick. So you can do that as well. You may not need to render the kick if your collaboration partner is thinking about doing their own kick or whatever. What you can do, though, which might be helpful, is you can always send them the MIDI information. The easiest way for me to do this is usually I just do Command or Control J. What this does is it consolidates the MIDI all into one file. And then what I'll do is I'll just export that MIDI clip, and then the person I'm collaborating with can just open up that MIDI file. And sometimes my kicks might have like an extra swing or some sort of like kick fill that I'll do with it. So it is helpful also for them just, not to have to manually go in and put in and draw all the kicks themselves or whatever. So I think that's super helpful, and it's something that's going to save them time, and it's going to save me time as well. Okay, so let's say, for instance, you're in the scenario where you actually do want to export every single stem. Now, the easiest way to do this is to go into all individual tracks. This is going to render out, essentially every single track in your session, and it's also going to render out your sends. So your sends are going to be like your reverb sends or your delay sends or any of those types of sends. And when you do that, you're going to end up with 120 or 122 tracks. So what I recommend is, try uploading it directly to a file service from the get-go, like Dropbox or Google Drive. If you don't have enough storage on Google Drive, export it all onto a specific hard drive that uses SSD. That way it's just quicker to copy and paste or cut and paste from there when you want to send it over to a different drive or whatever. I always try to work off of SSDs whenever I'm doing audio heavy projects, because they just read your information faster. If you're using a regular disk drive, the HDD, the reading times on those are significantly lower than they are on SSDs. So that's one of the things that I do. A couple other little things. Some people ask, what should you do? Should you include return and main effects? Should you normalize? Should you, personally, I leave all of this blank. And the reason being is that if you select include return and master effects or main effects, what's going to happen is every time Ableton is going through one of your tracks and it's exporting it, it's going to apply the processing that you have on your master. So let's say on your master you have a really heavy compressor like an OTT, right? And the reason you're using it is just to maybe glue the whole track together. Now what's going to happen is when you export those stems, it's going to have that OTT setting on every single channel. So that's a problem, because when your collaboration partner is going to start pulling in the tracks into his own session, whether it's Pro Tools, FL Studio, Logic, they're going to start seeing that, oh, why do all these tracks have this OTT sound to them? And then when they play them all together at once, all the stems, it's going to sound terrible, because you've essentially rendered out every single track with your master effect settings. So I would avoid that unless you're doing something very specific. The only case where I could see that potentially being useful is if you have like a clipper and you just want to have a clipper effect on every single channel, right? So you're clipping the transients, and then, for the purpose of making a mix louder or whatever. That's the only use case I could see. Or, maybe you're trying to do like a batch processing of all your files. So what I would do if I wanted to say, I want to apply a specific EQ cut to multiple files, this is one way to batch process in Ableton. Put whatever EQ cut that you're doing or whatever setting, and then you can export out, all of those sounds or all of those stems with that specific effect. And usually what I do is, if I do that, I turn it on and off after I'm done exporting, because I'm not going to use that effect on the master processor. The other question is, should you render as loop? I mean, probably not, unless you're doing like a specific sample pack kind of work. If you're doing just collaboration tracks and it's a full arrangement, you don't necessarily want to have your stems rendered as loops, and it's also going to take a lot longer to do that. Should you convert to mono? Definitely not. Should you normalize? Now, this is a question that I get a lot too. To be honest, I've never normalized my track stems. I know a lot of people do that, specifically like FL Studio producers love doing this. I don't like normalizing personally because it essentially what it does is it tries to figure out and use math to identify where the highest peaks and the lowest peaks are, or whatever, of each track. And so what it does is it kind of ruins your mix to some extent, because now you have to remix everything back from scratch. Particularly if you already have your tracks, fairly well mixed and you like the balance of it. So when you normalize it, essentially, you're going to have a huge shift in your dynamics. You're going to have a huge shift in your stems contextually, right, when they're all together, in terms of, just how they sounded before when you had them in your session, and then when you have them all as stems. So personally, I would avoid normalizing. I only use normalizing when I'm creating sample packs, or I'm doing multiple files that I want them to have, at least a consistent volume. And again, like, normalize doesn't always work that way either, right? Normalization is not really a topic I'm going to really talk about here and on this video. But it is something to maybe kind of like research and look up, and specifically how Ableton does normalization, because every DAW does it a little bit differently. So before you use normalize, just make sure you know why you're using it, what the purpose is, so that you don't end up making, you just lose time essentially rendering out a bunch of tracks for no reason. Create analysis file. I personally don't really ever do this. I think there's been a few instances where I might have done this, but if you hover over here and then you look down here, it says create analysis file. It says live carries out an analysis of every sample loaded. When this preference is set to on, the analysis results are stored in a file, eliminating the need to reanalyze the sample each time it's used. The analysis file has the sample's name with an ASD extension and is placed in the same directory as a sample. So, this is only useful if you're going to be using Ableton. If you're using FL Studio or Logic, not going to help you, right? Because the ALS file or the analysis file is only going to work within Ableton. So, unless you're sharing stems to another Ableton producer, it may not be necessary. Then finally, a sample rate, 48, 44, 1. Obviously the higher up you go, the larger the stems are going to be in file size. And 44.1 is pretty standard already. 4800 is obviously, maybe you get some slight higher fidelity in the audio on the high end. And then, when you go up to some of these higher settings, you're essentially in recording mode, or what, you would want to record into. I wouldn't export anything above 48, in my personal opinion, because, again, if they're not recorded instruments and they're synths and stuff like that, you're not really preserving anything, because, you're already, I was working on this project the whole time at 44.1. And on Windows, 44.1 works a lot better. On Mac, 4800 for some reason seems to deliver better results for performance. But yeah, I don't know. And then finally, these settings, PCM, encode PCM, file type, blah, blah, blah. I just keep these settings. These are, I think, the default Ableton settings. 32-bit you would want to do maybe if you're trying to do some sort of like post kind of stuff, from my understanding, but I'm not an expert on that, so don't quote me. But yeah, anyways, I hope this video was helpful. This is just a way for you to be able to kind of grasp the concept of collaborating and being able to send stems back and forth with your collaborator. So yeah, hope you like this video, and if you haven't yet, like and subscribe. Follow my website, johngrantofficial.com. I have several Ableton racks that I'm selling right now that I think are great for EDM, trance, house, and all sorts of genres, really. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you.